Hello students. Today we are going to do the lesson Chinese Cinderella. Your text is an extract taken from the book Chinese Cinderella written by Adeline Yen Ma. Please turn to page number 147. Lesson objectives. In this lesson, you will be able to understand what autobiographies are, to identify the literary techniques used by the author, to read and understand the lesson and answer the given questions in your textbook, to develop arguments and write about different concepts. When given an extract or a text that we haven't seen before, the first thing that should be done is to take a look at the title and analyze it. We have to gather as many clues as we can from the title so that we are prepared to expect what will be given in the text. Let's now take a look at the title. There are two words in the title: Chinese, Cinderella. When taking these two words as two separate components, let's look at them individually. What do you remember? What are the words that would come to your mind when you hear the word Chinese? These are some of the words that came to my mind. Chinese people are from China. They are Asian and they are fair. China is mostly associated with the color red and dragons. Let's now take a look at the second word, Cinderella. What comes to your mind when you hear the word Cinderella? These are some words that came to my mind: fairy tale, midnight, Prince Charming, stepmother, stepsisters. So these are the direct connotations that we can derive from the words Chinese Cinderella, which is our title. Now, what do you think the story is going to be about? Let's prepare ourselves to look at the text. To give you some background and context, let's first look at what our textbooks tell us. Chinese Cinderella is an autobiography by Adeline Yen Ma, in which she describes growing up in a wealthy family in Hong Kong in the 1950s. She is rejected by her stepmother, and her father is a distant though powerful character. She spends much of her time at boarding school. Does everyone know what an autobiography is? An autobiography is when somebody writes the story of their life. This word is taken as opposed to a biography, which is when someone else writes about another person, a popular or a well-known person. So the story that we have, Chinese Cinderella, is an autobiography by Adeline Yen Ma, which she has written herself. It's an account of her childhood and how she came to be to where she is now. Okay. Do you know any other childhood autobiographies? Quickly try to remember whether you've heard of any other autobiographies. This is something I found interesting. Boy, Tales of Childhood by Roald Dahl. This is the cover page of it. I'm sure most of you all have seen it. Another one is called A Child Called It by Dave Pelzer. Now let's look at an extract taken by Adeline Yen Ma's website. Adeline Yen Ma was born in Tianjin, China. She lived in Shanghai as a child and moved to Hong Kong at age 11. At 14, she won a writing competition which convinced her father to send her to study in England. She attended London Hospital Medical School, graduated as a physician, and established a thriving medical practice in California. She worked as an anesthetist at Western Anaheim Community Hospital and became chief of anesthesia. Right, let's look at the words in red now. These, I would like to call these pointer words. These words would provide you clues as to what to expect in the text. So, as seen from the title, the story deals with somebody from China, but that person is now living in Hong Kong, or at the time of the story is probably living in Hong Kong. She is 11 years old, and when she was 14, she won a writing competition, and it was this that convinced her father to send her to study in England, where she studied to become a doctor, and she studied to become a doctor in London, and then she moved to California, where she has a practice. Right. So this is a picture of Adeline's siblings. Can you tell me who Adeline would be? This little girl in a white short dress, that is Adeline. This is Adeline, probably at the time of the story. This is the cover page of the book Chinese Cinderella. And this is Adeline Yen Ma. So now let's move on to read the text. While reading, pay special attention to difficult words, the speaker of the story, who's talking, the tone of the speaker, the setting or the context of the story, the language used by the speaker, and the structure of narration. Right, children. Now let's look at the text. From Chinese Cinderella by Adeline Yen Ma. Time went by relentlessly, and it was Saturday again. 8 weeks more, and it would be the end of term. In my case, perhaps the end of school forever. 4 of us were playing Monopoly. My heart was not in it, and I was losing steadily. Outside, it was hot, and there was a warm wind blowing. The radio warned of a possible typhoon the next day. It was my turn, and I threw the dice. As I played, the thought of leaving school throbbed at the back of my mind like a persistent toothache. Right, children. So let's stop there and take a look at what we read so far. Even though we haven't read the beginning part of the novel, the part of the novel before the extract, we are given several clues as to where the story is set. It was a Saturday, and 8 weeks before school finishes, she is playing Monopoly with 4 other children, maybe her best friends, and it was a warm day. and there was going to be a typhoon the next day. Okay, now let's look at some of the phrases that she has chosen to present us with. 8 weeks more and it would be the end of term. In my case, perhaps the end of school forever. Why do you think she'd say something like this? It could either be because she's going to have to stop schooling, or maybe she's going to change her school, or maybe her parents wants her to homeschool. It could be one of many different reasons. Let's just keep that for later and let's see something else. So, these words, she says, as I played, the thought of leaving school throbbed at the back of my mind like a persistent toothache. That's very vivid, the words that she uses. Persistent toothache. I'm sure most of you all have had toothaches and you all understand how painful they are. But the fact that her worry about leaving school is she equates it to a persistent toothache. So you can see how much of anxiety and fear is loaded in that particular phrase. Right, let's go back to reading. Adeline, Mummy and Valentino was calling. You can't go now, Mary protested. For once I'm winning. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good, you've landed on my property. $35, please. Oh, good afternoon, Mother Valentino. We all stood up to greeted her. Adeline, didn't you hear me call you? Hurry up downstairs. Your chauffeur is waiting to take you home. Full of foreboding, I ran downstairs as in a nightmare, wondering who had died this time. Father's chauffeur assured me everyone was healthy. Okay, let's stop there again, children. Let's look at this. When she is a little girl who's in a boarding school, and her teacher in charge is coming and telling her that her driver is downstairs and that her chauffeur is downstairs and that she has to go home. And the first thought that comes to her mind is she is wondering who had died this time. Put yourself in her shoes, children. If you all were in a boarding school and you all got a chance to go home, what would your first thought be? I'm pretty sure it wouldn't be this. So there is something that we as readers are not privy to yet. She haven't told us a part of her thoughts yet. So let's see. Then why are you taking me home? I asked. How should I know? He answered defensively, shrugging his shoulders. Your guess is as good as mine. They give the orders and I carry them out. During the short drive home, my heart was full of dread and I wondered what I had done wrong. Our car stopped at an elegant villa at mid-level, halfway up the hill between the peak and the harbour. Where are we? I asked foolishly. Don't you know anything? The chauffeur replied rudely. This is your new home. Your parents moved here a few months ago. I had forgotten, I said as I got out. Right. So here we see something else. Why are you taking me home? So she doesn't know why she has to go home. And obviously the chauffeur doesn't know either. But he's very rude the way he answers. Right? So usually children, when we think of a child being sent to a boarding school, we try and imagine somewhere far away or maybe to another country, maybe trying to give an education which is not present in the local schools. However, here Adeline tells us the drive home is a short drive. That means where she lives is not very far from the boarding school. So we get a very rational question as to why she is in a boarding school in the first place. And these words that she says, my heart was full of dread and I wondered what I had done wrong. So going back to our earlier point about if it was us who were in a boarding school and we get a chance to go home, would we think that we had done something wrong? So she is a very anxious little girl and she's now going to go home and she doesn't know what's happening. We don't know either. So let's see what's going to happen in this. Another thing. So this is a new house and she doesn't know where her parents live. The chauffeur is making fun of her. Don't you know anything? So that means she probably haven't come home for some time. Your parents moved here a few months ago. So that means she haven't come home for a few months, which is also quite sad if you think about it. Gum opened the door. Inside, it was quiet and cool. Where is everyone? Your mother is out playing bridge. Your two brothers and little sister bathing by the swimming pool. Your father is in his room and wants to see you as soon as you get home. See me in his room? I was overwhelmed by the thought that I had been summoned by Father to enter the Holy of Holies, a place to which I had never been invited. Why? So, once again, children, we get clues as to her family background. So she's in a elite sort of a neighborhood. Her mother is playing bridge, her siblings are sunbathing by the swimming pool, and her father is in his own room, which tells us that they are a quite well-to-do family. And look at the way she's describing his room. So she's overwhelmed at the thought to be summoned by her father. Understandable. If suddenly our fathers come and tell us that he wants to talk to us, we'd get pretty scared too. We'd be wondering, okay, what did I do wrong? And we'd also be pretty anxious. But here she goes a step beyond what we would feel, and she's saying, she's comparing her father's office or her father's room to the Holy of Holies, a cliche, a place to which I had never been invited. So, as a child, she's never been invited to her father's room. That in itself tells us something about the relationship she probably has with her father. So, let's read on. Timidly, I knocked on the door. Father was alone, looking relaxed in his slippers and bathrobe, reading a newspaper. I smiled as I entered. Sorry, he smiled as I entered, and I saw he was in a happy mood. I breathed a small sigh of relief at first, but became uneasy when I wondered why he was being so nice, thinking, is this a giant ruse on his part to trick me? Dare I let my guard down? Right. So, look here, we get a glimpse to her thought process now. So she's knocking on the door timidly, and her father was alone. He was in slippers and a bathrobe, and he was reading the newspaper. He smiled, and because he smiled, she comes to the conclusion that he was in a happy mood. So she was relieved at first, and then suddenly she became uneasy again, and she was wondering why he was being so nice. Now, children, if we put ourselves once again to Adeline's shoes, if our father was happy, we'd also be happy, wouldn't we? We wouldn't think, okay, is he pretending to be happy? Okay, now what is he going to do? Is he going to shout at me? We don't really think like that, right? So why do you think Adeline thinks this? Why she thinks, is this a giant ruse on his part to trick me? Dare I let my guard down? Important words, children. Sit down, he pointed to a chair. Don't look so scared. Here, take a look at this. They're writing about someone we both know, I think. He handed me the day's newspaper, and there, in one corner, I saw my name, Adeline Yen, in capital letters, prominently displayed. Alright, so now we see why he's in a good mood. So he says, please pay attention. There's a repetition. Sit down, followed by an action, which is once again a repetition. He points to a chair. And then he says, don't look so scared. Here, take a look at this. They're writing about someone we both know, I think. He he's trying to maybe surprise her, not give her any clues, and trying to see her reaction. So the day's newspaper is there and her name is there in capital letters. So let's now look at what the paper has printed. It was announced today that 14-year-old Hong Kong schoolgirl Adeline Zhong Ling Yen of Sacred Heart Contextual School, Kane Road, Hong Kong, has won first prize in the international playwriting competition held in London, England, for the 1951-1952 school year. It is the first time that any local Chinese student from Hong Kong has won such a prestigious event. Besides the medal, the prize comes with a cash reward of 50 English pounds. A sincere congratulations, Adeline Yen, for bringing honor to Hong Kong. We are proud of you. Is it possible? Am I dreaming? Me? The winner? Okay, so looking at this extract from the newspaper, we get several clues as to the context. We get her full name, Adeline Zhong Ling Yen. We get her school, Sacred Heart Contextual School. We get her age, she's 14 years old. We get the name of the competition. It's an international playwriting competition, which probably means that she's pretty good at writing. Then we get a clue about the year which this was written, 1951 to 1952. Then we also get the fact that she has won a cash reward of 50 English pounds. And then the 3 questions. Now these questions, these are questions that she's not vocal about. These are her thoughts. So she's not expecting answers. These are rhetorical questions. I was going up the lift this morning with my friend C.Y. Tung when he showed me this article and asked me, is the winner Adeline Junling Yen related to you? The two of you have the same uncommon last name. Now C.Y. himself has a few children about your age, but so far none of them has won an international literary prize, as far as I know. So I was quite pleased to tell him, you are my daughter. Well done. He looked radiant. For once, he was proud of me. In front of his revered colleague, Si Bai-tung, a prominent fellow businessman also from Shanghai, I had given him face. I thought, is this the big moment I have been waiting for? My whole being vibrated with all the joy in the world. I only had to stretch out my hand to reach the stars. All right, children. So this is the father telling why he is so happy. Now we understand why he is so happy. So he meets a colleague on the lift when he is going to work, and his colleague mentions about the paper article and asks him whether he knows this child, and the father is proud to say that this is his daughter. And he's also, another interesting thing is that what the father says here, he says he himself has a few children about your age, but so far none of them has won an international literary prize. Okay, So that is the reason that we realize is the reason why the father is so happy, because his daughter has managed to grab an international prize which his colleagues' daughters haven't been able to. Right. So, next paragraph, he looked radiant. Okay. And for once, he was proud of me. Important thing to notice, children. She says, for once, he was proud of me. It seems as if all this time the father has not noticed about Adeline. We we can sort of understand this when we realize, especially if we go back to our earlier the earlier part of the text, where it says that she has two brothers, so two or three brothers. So then we realize that this is because her father might not have noticed her, because back in 1950s the situation was different, whereas boys or sons were given prominence over especially things like education over daughters. So that's probably why Adeline here says, for once he was proud of me. But this is something very important that we need to remember. I had given him face. Right. So here it says face in this context, a positive, successful appearance in the eyes of other people. Right. So usually we talk about this the other way around. We say I lost face or losing face in front of people. That means you do something that either brings shame to your family or something along those lines. But here I had given him face means that she has made him proud, or she has given him cause to be proud. And here's something very innocent that reflects her age and her innocence is when she says, my whole being vibrated with all the joy in the world. I only had to stretch out my hand and reach the stars. Right. So let's go back to reading. Tell me, how did you do it? He continued. How come you won? Once again, the father seems to be a bit doubtful as to how she won. Well, the rules and regulations were so very complicated, one really has to be dedicated just to understand what they want. Perhaps I was the only one determined enough to enter, and there were no other competitors. Okay, so she's making some self-deprecating humor, as in she's putting herself down, or she's trying to make a humorous comment at the expense of herself. And look at the reaction of her father. He laughed approvingly. I doubt it very much, but that's a good answer. Please, father, I asked boldly, thinking it was now or never. May I go to the university in England too, just like my brothers? I do believe you have potential. Tell me, what would you study? Right. So Adeline has just realized that she has undivided attention of her father, and for once her father is proud of her, and she is going to reap the benefits. She's going to grab what she can from the moment. My heart gave a giant lurch as it dawned on me that he was agreeing to let me go. How marvelous it was simply to be alive. Study? I thought. Going to England is like entering heaven. Does it matter what you do after you get to heaven? But father was expecting an answer. What about creative writing? After all, I had just won first prize in an international writing competition. I plan to study literature. I'll be a writer. Okay, so she won her competition in international playwriting and she won it, and she wants to go to England, and understandably she wants to study literature. It's probably what she likes best, maybe her favorite subject. Writer? He scoffed. You're going to starve. What language are you going to write in? And who's going to read your writing? Though you may think you're an expert in both Chinese and English, your Chinese is actually rather elementary. As for your English, don't you think the native English speakers can write better than you? I waited in silence. I did not wish to contradict him. Okay, good move on Adeline's part. So we understand that the father is an authoritative figure in her life, and so her choice was to study literature, but he seems to think that it's not a good choice. So let's see what he has to say about it. You will go to England with third brother this summer, and you will go to medical school. After you graduate, you will specialize in obstetrics. Women will always be having babies. Women patients prefer women doctors. You will learn to deliver their babies. That's a foolproof profession for you. Don't you agree? Okay, so this is what her father thinks. This is not a suggestion. This is not a request. This is a demand. Or rather, he's ordering her. You will go to England with third brother. So, not a name, we are getting a number. Third brother this summer. And you will go to medical school. You will specialize in obstetrics. You will learn to deliver their babies. Okay. Agree? Of course, I agreed. Apparently, he had it all planned out. As long as he let me go to university in England, I would study anything he wished. How did that line go in Wordsworth's poem? Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive. Father, I shall go to medical school in England and become a doctor. Thank you very, very much. Right. So she doesn't care as long as she gets to go abroad and she gets to go to England. It's probably her lifelong dream. So she says, as long as he lets me go to university in England, I would study anything he wished. That just shows how much she wants to leave where she was and go to England. She remembers Wordsworth's poem. What does this suggest, children? It shows how much she liked literature. She really did want to study literature. And she knew enough about poetry that she could quote one of Wordsworth's poem by memory. But she still agrees to study medicine just like her father wants, because it's her father who's going to send her abroad. Okay, so now that's the text. I hope you all understood what we read about. It's always good to read it again, especially after an initial reading. Initial reading is usually done to get a general idea of what we are going to read about, and our second reading is usually to further understand what we have read and comprehend what we have read in the way that sort of we put ourselves into the shoes of the speaker and we look at the text as something that we would say. That would help us understand it more. Right. So y'all have the freedom to read it again. For the purpose of the presentation, I will move on to the next slide. Okay. Can y'all answer? I'm not going to help y'all. These are general questions that would help you to know whether you have actually understood what the story was about. Can you think of differences between your generation and that of your grandparents? At what time does Adeline's father notice her? How does this contribute to our opinion of his character? How does Adeline feel about going home? How does Adeline's feelings of school contrast with her feelings about her home. What are the connotations of stepchild? Adeline is telling us the story of her life. Is she a reliable narrator? Right. So let's look at these questions and try to understand what I mean by them. Can you think of differences between your generation and that of your grandparents? Right. So this is a very obvious question that I'm sure y'all can think of an answer. Times have changed, societies changed, economies have changed, the culture has changed, societal values have changed. What are some of the differences that you think? What are some of the major differences that you think is there between your generation and your grandparents' generation? At what time does Adeline's father notice her? How does this contribute to our opinion of his character? Right. So I mentioned this in the textual reading when Adeline's father notices her, and of course this gives us an initial assessment of his character, and we as a reader, we obviously, it's natural to make a judgment about his character, and we have formed our opinion of his character. So our opinions would be personal. How does Adeline feel about going home? Once again, I have addressed this question in the textual reading. How does Adeline's feeling of school contrast with her feelings about her home? Okay, we discussed this. What are the connotations of stepchild? Interesting. So we realize that she is a stepchild, as in her father has married twice. So what are the connotations? How does being a stepchild affect her? Adeline is telling us the story of her life. Is she a reliable narrator? Another interesting question. So she narrates this story. We understand that she is the speaker of this text, and she narrates this story of her childhood. So she's narrating it as a child. Do you think that she's a reliable narrator? Of course, your answers would be different from each person. So I am looking forward to reading all your interesting answers. Right, children. Now that we have read the text and we have looked at some basic comprehension questions, let's now look at language and techniques. Okay. The first one, symbolism. Can someone tell me, did you all find symbolism here in the text anywhere? For both symbolism and foreboding. I thought that the image of typhoon was quite useful. It's almost ominous, as if something wrong, something bad, or something that is going to be life changing is going to happen in Adeline's life now, and the reader has to prepare themselves for it, right? Vivid imagery. Vivid imagery is seen where she talks about the toothache, right? What does she say? The thought of leaving school throbbed at the back of my mind like a persistent toothache. My gosh, that is vivid imagery, right? Hyperbole. Where does she use hyperbole? She uses hyperbole when she says, study, I thought. Going to England is like entering heaven. Does it matter what you do after you get to heaven? There, hyperbole. She has exaggerated it. Formal tone throughout, from the moment she learns that she has to go home till the moment she enters the father's room, and even beyond that, there is formal tone that she uses which creates tension, right? Look at the one before the last point. Tension is created through, especially through language, of course through symbolism and vivid imagery. Alright. The three rhetoric questions. Is it possible? Am I dreaming? Me, the winner? What does that show? The three rhetorical questions show overjoy, excitement, right? She's surprised. Negative emotions. Throughout the story, especially in the beginning, whenever she thought about going home, she had negative emotions, right? So for her, home was a scary place, and she was anxious about going home, right? Right. So now we are going to look at the two main characters for a character analysis, right? Adeline and her father. Let's first look at Adeline. She is depressed, wistful, and scared, right? So in the beginning, she's depressed about going home. Then she's scared. When she gets home, she's scared. She's also wistful about the future, right? Second, time and education mattered to her. She was someone who we can say that she came from a wealthy family, but for her, time and education mattered. Home doesn't mean love and family. There we learn in the earlier slide we spoke about how thoughts of home was negative for her and it created stress, tension, and anxiety in her. Right? For us, home equals something somewhere that is comfort and family and love. It's a place where we can be ourselves. But for her, home doesn't mean love and family. She has a traditional role to fulfill, right? She had a traditional role to fulfill. As a daughter, she had to give face to her father. Okay, children, give face to her father. She had to make them proud. She was thoughtful and careful, wasn't she? She was analyzing everything about her father, from the way her father was sitting and what he was doing, for the way he was talking and what he was saying. She was thoughtful and she was very careful, and she thought very well before she gave answers, right? She was also very respectful of her father. Now let's look at her father. Stereotypical paternal role. Don't you agree, children? Was a very stereotypical, traditional father figure in the story, right? He was completely unaware of the daughter. He didn't even know until his friend came up to him and said that his daughter has won a competition, right? Until then, he didn't even know about it. Lack of concern or care. So he didn't care enough for her to know about her education and about her life. Reputation is important, right? Again, this whole story about the face. So the father expected to look to expected from the children to gain face, right? As in the children had a role to play where they had to make the parents, or especially the father, proud. No confidence in the daughter. See, no confidence in the daughter. He asked, "Tell me, how did you do it?" He continued. "How come you won?" As if saying, "How come you won? How come no one else won?" You know, unaware of her interests. Where does that come in? She says, "I plan to study literature. I'll be a writer." Writer? He scoffed. "You're going to starve. What language are you going to write? And who is going to read your writing?" See, completely unaware of her interests. He was harsh and critical. Harsh and critical, same paragraph, right? Though you may think you're an expert in both Chinese and English, your Chinese is actually rather elementary. As for your English, don't you think the native English speakers can write better than you? Right? Completely harsh and critical. Next, let's look at the themes, right? So I thought there were three main themes. The first two were almost the same thing. Stereotypical gender roles, right? Where did stereotypical gender roles come in? When the brothers. So the brothers could study, but the sister had to get permission to study, right? She thought that her education was over now. So it was only because of this competition that she got a chance to have the opportunity to do further studies, right? But the brothers were already studying. Traditional family roles. She has to gain her father's trust. She has to make him proud. She is a daughter. She has to knock before entering the father's room, right? And the main theme I thought was distant relationships, right? This I thought was the main theme. Let's look at distant relationships now. So only goes home if someone dies. From the moment she's told that she has to go home, she thinks that somebody has died. Now who has died? Right? Then we'll look at the chauffeur. He was cold and distant. He didn't have a name. And he was only duty bound. Don't you even know that? This is your house. Your family moved. He's telling that, right? He's cold, he's distant, he has no name, he's just a chauffeur, so she doesn't even know him. Short drive. Family didn't pick her up. She lives in a boarding school, right? So even if the drive was short, the family didn't come to pick her up. They sent a chauffeur, and she lives in a boarding school when she could have lived at home and come to school like a normal child. Quiet and cool. This about the house shows the relationships that's inside the house, right? They were all doing their solitary activities. Okay, children? All doing their solitary activities. Mother was playing bridge. Two brothers and little sister were sunbathing by the swimming pool. Father was in his room, right? Holy of Holies. This is a biblical term, children. It means temple. Okay, so when we, in a work of art, in a work of literature, when another work is mentioned, we call that allusion. Allusion. So, Holy of Holies meant the father's room was formal. It was it was sacred, right? She was awed to enter it. There was respect and there was also separation. She had to knock to enter the room, right? Then the father's mood. Attention to detail. So she's very careful. Now, the moment she enters, she's analyzing the father. What is he wearing? Where is he sitting? What is he doing? What does he look like? It probably suggests unpleasant memories, right? She's analyzing her father's mood so carefully that the reader is thinking maybe there might be unpleasant memories. Okay. Dare I let my guard down? She doesn't trust. So there's mistrust in Adeline about her father. Lack of communication. A big, big problem here, right? Lack of communication. Right. So let's turn to page 149 and take a look at our first activity. So since we can't make small groups or partners, we can discuss these questions and individually write down what we think. Do you think that adults always remember the incidents of their childhood accurately? Do you think that this matters when writing a book like Chinese Cinderella? All right. So, before thinking whether adults remember incidents of their childhood, let's think about whether we remember incidents of our childhood. What's your earliest memory of your childhood? Do you remember crying or your parents changing your nappies? Or do you remember being fed as an infant? Or do you remember as a toddler you walking a bit or trying to run or jog or playing with your siblings? Maybe your favorite dress as a child. What's your earliest childhood memory? And remember, this is at your age. So adults, as an adult, after many years have passed, do you believe that they always remember the incidents of their childhood accurately? Something to think about. Some critics think that characters in Chinese Cinderella are either all good or all bad, and that very few of the characters are realistic. What do you think of this point of view? Right, children. So, in a text, usually what makes a book or a novel or any prose good is that it portrays characters in a rounded manner. We call them rounded characters. As in, you don't just see good people and bad people. Society is not divided like that. There are no good people and bad people. It's always good people who has a little bit of bad in them and bad people who will also have a little bit of good in them. So a good piece of writing would always have rounded characters. Let's for for example, think of any story that you know. Since we are talking about boarding schools, I would like to talk about Harry Potter. Most of you all, I'm sure, have read Harry Potter. That's also once again a boarding school. Sorry, the story is about a boarding school. So, can you think of some character that is fully bad? I suppose the main villain, who Voldemort, who is shown as a very bad person, and somebody who's shown as a very good person, very good people are um, probably Harry's parents. But then again, remember, Harry's parents were not portrayed as completely good people. Harry's father made fun of Snape. So, always in whatever literary context, whatever book you're reading, always try to find whether what you're studying in school, whether those apply for the book that you're reading. Does the author give a rounded portrayal of the character, or is it only a very linear or very 2D sort of, two dimensional sort of a portrayal? So, critics think that Chinese Cinderella is a is not very realistic in the sense that some characters are all good and some characters are all bad. What do you think? As a child, we tend to look at the world that way. We believe that some people are really good and we believe that some people are really bad. We believe our parents are really good, that they are incapable of doing anything wrong or bad. And we believe some people are just really bad and you don't think that they can do any good. So, because Adeline has written this story as a child, maybe what the critics are saying is true. Maybe the characters are not portrayed in a very rounded way. What do you think? Once again, you will have to read the text again. Let's now look at activity 2. Analyzing emotions. So they have given you all a table which you have to copy and complete, and you have to find evidence in the extract for Adeline's feelings. Right. So I'm sure you can read this on your own and understand. The first table is regarding Adeline's feelings before she meets her father. For example, her first reaction on hearing that he wants to see her. The evidence given is that she is overwhelmed. Right. The second one is she suggests her father's room is somewhere uniquely special, a place to be revered, an inner sanctum to which few, if any, are admitted. She says, the Holy of Holies, a place to which I had never been invited. Right? So let's look at the next table. That's when Adeline's feelings as she meets her father. So first they say he's commanding as indicated by the repetition and use of exclamation. And the evidence given in the text is use of exclamation marks. He orders her to sit down and repeats it. Right. So likewise, I'm sure you can go through you can do this exercise on your own. You will definitely need to peruse the text several times, read it over and over again. So if you don't find something at the first instance, that's okay. Leave it, go to the next point, and when you finish everything, you can come back, and probably when you read it again, you would realize, you would find the answers to the questions that you have missed. Right. So next activity, exploring language. Like all writers, Adeline Yenma uses certain effects in order to create a response in the reader. Copy and complete the following table explaining the effects you think she was trying to achieve with each technique. Right, so let's look at the table. The first column talks about the technique that she has used, and the second column would be intended effect. So when we look at the technique, let's try to spot this technique in the text, which will help you to find the intended effect. So I will help you with that. First technique, moves into the present tense. Okay, where do you think in the text that this is given? This is where I found it. As I played, the thought of leaving school throbbed at the back of my mind like a persistent toothache. Okay, so the intended effect is emphasizes her lack of confidence and how worried she was. Second one, use of repetition by her father. This is where I found it. Sit down, sit down. The intended effect is indicates either impatience or vigor. Right. So the third one, use of punctuation and short sentences. Try to find it on your own, children. This is where I found it. He looked radiant. For once, he was proud of me. Short sentences to the point. And the intended effect is it develops the reader's understanding of the character. Right. So for the next ones, I am not going to tell you what the intended effect is, but I will help you find the quotation. So, fourth one, use of triple rhetorical questions, all written in the present tense. I'm sure you already know where in the text this is. Rhetorical questions are questions intended without rhetorical questions are questions asked without an intention of having an answer. This is where I found it. Is it possible? Am I dreaming? Me, the winner? So this is something that she's questioning herself. This is her thought process. She's thinking about this. Use of cliche. I had given him face. This is a cliche in very Asian terms. Another cliche given would be Holy of Holies. Number 6. Use of numbers rather than names for children. Of course, we find this in the in father's speech, where he says, "You will go to England with third brother this summer, and you will go to medical school." So, seventh one, the passage starts in the past tense, moves through the present tense, and ends with the past tense. Right. So we found that in the beginning it was in the past tense. Then when she goes home and she walks to her father's room, it turns into present tense. And then in the end of the text, we realize it has gone to the past tense once again. Where do you find this instance? This is where I found it. The last paragraph. Agree? Of course, I agreed. Right. So now, children, it is up to you to find what the intended effect of that was expected by the speaker when writing, when choosing these particular phrases to write these. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Your next activity are the writing tasks. Consider the following two statements. Write an argument in favor of one of these statements. First one, boarding schools teach young people to become confident and well-rounded adults. Okay, a positive statement. Second, sending your children away to boarding school is cruel and unnatural. All right. So when taking these sentences individually, for the first one, the best example, once again, something that I used earlier, would be Harry Potter. Boarding schools teach young people to become confident and well-rounded adults. They spend such a long time away from homes that they become more independent. Second one, sending young children away to boarding school is cruel and unnatural. There, one of the best examples that I can find is Jane Eyre. If you have read the book, that gives a rendition of a very bleak school with sort of wicked principal, and where Jane as a child undergoes negative things, and which later affects her life. So you have to look at these two statements and you have to choose what you like best and provide an argument as to why you think it sums up your opinion. Number 2, describe your hopes and dreams for your future and how you would feel if someone made your dreams come true. Okay, this is something that I cannot discuss over a slideshow, children. This is extremely personal, but you all have dreams and ambitions that you want to achieve later on in life. So how would you feel if someone made your dreams come true? Right. So I'm ending this with the last my last slide is regarding the preface to the book Chinese Cinderella. So in this, Adeline gives us a quotation by Mother Teresa. She says, loneliness and the feeling of being unwanted are the greatest poverty. Right. Something to think about. Loneliness and the feeling of being unwanted are the greatest poverty. Do you agree or do you disagree? Once again, your opinion is personal. How does loneliness affect a person's self-concept? How you see yourself? Do you think it's affected who surrounds you or how lonely you feel as a person? Do you think that? Second one, education equals freedom. Do you agree? Right, with regard to this text that we are given, do you think education equals freedom? And moving outside the text, looking at society now or looking at your own lives, do you think that education equals freedom? I would like to see your opinions on these two essays, on these two questions as well. Right, children. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I hope you all understood the lesson. I hope you all are interested in the lesson and you will read a little bit about it, a little bit extra about it. Maybe find the book or read it or find a little background to Adeline and do your exercises. Right. Thank you very much.